What's going on, everybody? Appreciate you tuning in. A little post-draft kind of reaction to everything that we saw. There's a few things that I want to dive into and talk about. Got to talk about how the Cardinals did. Really good draft. Break down some of the pieces that they're able to kind of bring in here to Arizona. We got to talk a little bit about Cam Scatterby getting drafted, obviously, and kind of getting his opportunity now with the Giants. But the first thing we got to talk about is what everyone's talking about, which was the surprise of this year's NFL draft, and it is going to be the talking point you are going to hear on every sports talk show for the next week. What in the world happened with Shedeur Sanders? Have a lot of thoughts on this, and you see so many people kind of making suggestions that this has got to be about his dad Dion and kind of him putting a target on his son's back, or him making all this extra noise. And there's so many reasons of things that people are saying could be what happened and had everything to do with this conspiracy and not kind of what was on the tape and what was on the field. And I tend to think it's a combination of a lot of things. One, I think collectively teams looked at this year's quarterback draft class and said, it's not that good. On top of the fact they're looking at what's coming down the pipe next year, and they're saying next year's draft class is going to be really good. So if we want to take a quarterback and draft him, we're probably better off waiting until next year and seeing if we can get Arch Manning or get some of these other guys that are coming out that are going to be, franchise projecting, altering type quarterbacks. And there wasn't really a lot of those in here. Cam Ward, and then there was this drop off of what everyone kind of expected. So I think the huge part of it was he was a big name, and his name was bigger than his talent. And once teams dove into kind of the tape, they basically just said, I don't really think this guy is as good as the hype, and it's not really as much of, it's not as worth of it. So he starts falling because of that. We've all seen how many reports came out that he had some of the worst pre-draft interviews that some scouts said they had ever had, regardless of if it was for the draft or not. They just said, he was getting torn apart. I think he's very authentic. I think every time you see him talk, he's very true to himself. And he's an extremely confident guy, and he's got a resume that backs it up. And I think sometimes that rubs people a little bit the wrong way. And I also think there was an element of when you go into these interviews, a lot of times, if teams are unsure about you, they're more looking for a reason not to pick you than they are to pick you. And so you can't give them that opportunity. And sometimes you kind of just got to do the dance, the music that they set. And that's not the way that the Sanders family kind of operates. And I think this is a little bit of a repercussion of that. So he falls a little bit because of that. I think a lot of owners and a lot of teams, as you see, really didn't like the way that Dion talked about the whole situation come in, saying that that they might pull an Eli Manning and dictate which teams that they go to because he didn't want them going to a bad situation. And if you have the leverage to do that as a dad, of course you want to put your son in the best situation. And if you're Shedeur, of course you want to go to the best situation that you can possibly be in, where you can develop and you can also have an opportunity to play, and there's the right management, the right pieces. You don't want to end up somewhere like, Cleveland, where he ended up going. Here's the problem. They didn't have nearly as much leverage as Eli did. Eli was a guy that was projected a top 5 pick, had the talent, had the pedigree, had everything to back it. When you have that much cachet, you can throw it around a little bit and you can control some things. People weren't sure. Shedeur was like the 35th ranked prospect coming out. That's not a lot of leverage. That means that every team's going to have a chance to pick you and probably pass, and then coming back around, maybe they get you the second time. And if you're trying to say, I'm going to determine who it is, that's a guy that's a red flag and you can move off of. That doesn't sound like a guy that we have to take despite that. And you hear about it all the time. Your distraction can't outweigh your production. There's a lot of distraction with Shedeur. A lot of it, I would say, not his fault. Comes with the territory of his dad and how flamboyant his dad is. And he's never done anything wrong. He's not a guy that gets in trouble. He's a guy that there's hardly ever any controversy or anything like really around. And the biggest controversy he has is him flexing his Rolexes and everything at like opposing crowds, or when he had a small kind of get into the face of Colorado State's quarterback's face after they had played in their Rocky Mountain Showdown. And that's two rivals talking trash. I don't really look at that as a huge red flag to me. That's kind of pretty normal. But for better or for worse, his dad ran his mouth a lot. And the potential and talent and the draft, grade on his son couldn't quite back up everything that he had said, I feel like. And a lot of teams looked at it and said, it's a lot of problems that come up with this guy, especially if we draft him. He is a bit of a celebrity, and we're probably looking at him as our backup quarterback. And one of the last things that you want is a celebrity backup quarterback, because the moment something goes wrong with your starter, the fan base is craving for that guy. You have to answer questions all the time about him and stuff, and they become a distraction within the team as well. Again, it's not really Shedeur's fault. It's not, but it's also a business, and there is an element, a big element. It's not, teams aren't just interested in winning. They're also interested in making money. It is a business. It's an entertainment business, and part of winning also is the culture of the team. So there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, there's a lot of things that you're getting more than just the football player when you draft Shedeur. And so a lot of teams were willing to pass on it until finally he gets selected by the Browns late in this draft, as he ends up going with the 144th overall pick in the 6th round. They make a trade to kind of go and get him, which is also what I said like before, that this is one of the last teams that you'd want to go to. Just historically as a franchise, the last good quarterback that they really kind of had rolling was Baker Mayfield, who they decided they were going to move off of, and now he's turned into a Pro Bowler and a guy that, you can lean on a little bit down there in Tampa. Oh, by the way, this wasn't the only quarterback that the Browns drafted in this draft. They also went out and got Dylan Gabriel, a Heisman candidate out of Oregon, a guy that most people didn't think projected to the NFL, a guy that a lot of people thought was going to be like a 7th round draft pick or go undrafted. I covered him when he was playing for Oklahoma before he transferred to the Ducks. It's a guy that reads the field really well, but he doesn't have a terribly strong arm. He doesn't throw it deep almost ever. It's just check downs and kind of can read the defense a little bit. He's undersized. There's not a lot of things that you look at that get you super excited about his prospect as an NFL quarterback. And he still went ahead of Sanders. They also, by the way, still doing with everything that comes with Deshaun Watson and the wild headache of what's going on there. And they're paying him. I mean, they backed up the Brinks truck for him, and he is guaranteed a lot of money right now. They also signed Joe Flacco this offseason, who's normally like a guy that is such a solid backup quarterback and kind of a guy that can still throw it, but super old, not going to really challenge for the starting job, but a great guy to have in that room. They also have Kenny Pickett, who was with Pittsburgh and a guy that was a high draft pick as well. And, some people really kind of thought he had some prospects. So you have these 3 young guys and then an absolute headache in Deshaun Watson and then a solid backup in Joe Flacco for 5 quarterbacks in that room, which is more than what you normally would have on a roster. So does that mean Sanders now is going to be a practice player, or is he going to make the team? Because you're not probably carrying 5 quarterbacks. That would be wild. Maybe that's a blessing in a blessing in disguise for him, that he ends up either beating out a bunch of guys and proving people wrong, and he has to, he proves it in camp, and then they put him, in a nice spot in the depth chart, and he's able to learn a little bit. Or they don't want to deal with the headache and everything. They decide to cut him, and then he can actually pick what team he wants to go to, and he will have an opportunity playing somewhere that's a much better fit and kind of opportunity, because the Browns ain't it. That is a rough franchise right now to play for, with all the money they got tied up in Myles Garrett, all the money they got tied up in Watson, who doesn't look like he should be in the NFL at all anymore. and just an absolute franchise that has continually gotten in its own way and has never shown the ability to develop a quarterback. And it's just an awful situation for Sanders. It's worst case scenario for everything to kind of manifest to this point. So it's bad. Like, I feel really, really bad for him in the whole situation. Again, an ounce of it's self-inflicted. Most of it, I feel like, is circumstances with what's going on with his dad and around the league and everything like that. I think a large portion of it also is the tape didn't help him out that much. This was the weak class, and everyone looked at what's coming down the pipe next year and said, I'd rather not worry about it this year and then go after one of these guys next year, because there's going to be a few coming here into the draft next year.